At 9:47 p.m. on October 18, 2023, a young mother walked into a gas station off Highway 59 in Texas, barefoot, shaking, makeup streaked down her face. She told the clerk someone had taken her children. Moments later, she was on the phone with 911, voice trembling, begging for help. Within minutes, her story was everywhere. Amber alerts lit up phones across the state. News cameras crowded her driveway. America watched a grieving mother plead for the safe return of her kids. But behind her tears, something wasn't right. What unfolded over the days that followed would leave an entire community speechless. A story of loneliness, obsession, and a fantasy so powerful it swallowed reality whole. A story that began with a dating app and ended in the darkest way imaginable. Welcome back to True Crime Retold, where we uncover cases that test everything you think you know about human nature. If you find our deep dives as gripping as we do, please take a second to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new case. Now, let's get into it. Kira Daniels grew up in Cedar Heights, Texas, a place where the days moved slow, the opportunities were small, and dreams had a way of shrinking to fit the life you were born into. She was raised in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the south side of town, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who drifted in and out until he eventually stopped drifting back. Nothing about Kira's childhood was dramatic or unusual. It was the kind of life plenty of girls grew up with: tight budgets, worn-out shoes, second-hand clothes, and big dreams that never quite matched the reality around them. But Kira always wanted more. As a teenager, she spent her evenings watching romantic movies and imagining a life far from Cedar Heights. She pictured herself in big cities, in fancy hotels, traveling, being adored, being chosen. She wanted a fairy tale, and she believed with her whole heart that one day she would get it. But life had other plans. At 18, Kira met Marcus Daniels. He was 3 years older, steady, soft-spoken, and comfortable in the kind of simple life Kira was trying to escape. Marcus wasn't a dreamer. He was practical, predictable, the kind of man who did what he needed to do, and didn't say much more than that. They started dating quietly, spending nights in his small apartment watching TV and talking about the future in vague, half-finished sentences. A year later, Kira found out she was pregnant. The wedding happened fast, a small ceremony behind a cousin's house, a borrowed dress, folding chairs, and paper plates. No aisle, no decorations, no music, just vows spoken in the Texas heat, and the hope that love would be enough. Jalen was born in 2018. Mia followed in 2020. By 25, Kira had 2 children, a husband, and a life she had never truly planned for. She loved her kids, but motherhood hit her hard. Her days blurred together. Diapers, meals, daycare, laundry, late bills, early mornings. Marcus worked long shifts at a distribution warehouse, came home exhausted, ate in silence, and fell asleep on the couch. He wasn't unkind. He wasn't abusive. He was just tired, tired in a way that made him unaware of how tired Kira was too. Kira felt invisible. Forgotten, left behind. Her friends were posting vacation photos, celebrating promotions, starting careers, going out on weekends. Meanwhile, she spent her evenings wiping down counters and trying not to cry when she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself anymore. She was young, but she didn't feel young. She was married, but she felt alone. And every time she scrolled through social media and saw the lives other women were living, she felt something sharp twist inside her: envy, longing, regret. She wanted to feel special again, wanted to feel seen, wanted the life she used to imagine, but she didn't know how to reach for it, or whether she even deserved it anymore. Kira didn't know it yet, but she was standing on the edge of choices that would change everything, and the person who would push her closer wasn't her husband, or her children, or even a stranger online. It was someone far closer, someone she trusted, someone who had no idea that a little encouragement, a little temptation, a little glimpse into another world would set Kira on a path she could never come back from. It all began with her oldest friend, Tasha. Tasha Green had been a part of Kira's life long before adulthood complicated everything. They grew up on the same block, shared the same hand-me-down clothes, and whispered the same teenage dreams into the night. But while Kira settled into early marriage and motherhood, Tasha took a very different path. By 27, Tasha was the definition of the soft life aesthetic. She lived in a downtown apartment with gold decor, white rugs she never had to vacuum herself, and a closet full of clothes she bought just to take pictures in. She was always posting brunch photos, rooftop selfies, and late-night stories of expensive restaurants she didn't pay for. Tasha had mastered a lifestyle powered almost entirely by dating apps. And not the regular ones Kira knew. Tasha's apps had filters for nationality, income level, and passport stamps. She spoke casually about men in London, athletes in Miami, businessmen in South Africa, and millionaires in Dubai who sent her money just for attention. None of it felt real to Kira. It felt like a movie Tasha was somehow living inside while everyone else watched from outside the screen. Tasha floated in and out of Kira's apartment with long lashes, expensive perfume, and stories that made Kira feel like she was standing still while the rest of the world raced ahead. Kira would sit on the couch in leggings stained with formula while Tasha described private drivers, expensive gifts, and hotel nights that sounded like something from a fantasy novel. And Kira listened and wished and envied. She didn't envy Tasha's men, she envied the freedom, the luxury, the attention, the feeling of being seen. One night in late September, after putting the kids to bed and cleaning the kitchen alone again, Kira broke down and told Tasha how stuck she felt, how small her life seemed, how invisible she felt next to the women she saw online. Tasha didn't judge her. She didn't tell her to be grateful or remind her that some people had it worse. Instead, she smiled the way people smile when they're about to reveal a secret. She pulled out her phone and showed Kira a dating app she swore was different. Not a hookup app, not a cheap site. This one, she said, was where the real men were. Businessmen, travelers, international workers with money and connections. Tasha said, "You don't have to do anything crazy. Just make a profile, talk, have fun, feel alive again." Kira hesitated. It felt wrong, even thinking about talking to other men. But the truth was, she was starving for attention, for validation, for a reminder that she was more than a tired mother and an overwhelmed wife. And for once, she didn't want to say no. That night, while Marcus slept on the couch with the TV still on, Kira downloaded the app. Tasha helped her take a picture, nothing too revealing, nothing too fake, just her looking like the best version of the woman she used to be. The profile was simple. Kira, 27, Texas. Open to conversation. She didn't mention the husband. She didn't mention the 2 kids asleep in the next room. Within minutes, the messages started. Some were awkward, some were boring, some were too forward. But then one name appeared. Rayyan. He introduced himself as Sheikh Rayyan Al Maktoum, a businessman from Dubai in the United States for work. His profile showed a yacht, a skyline view, crisp suits, and a smile that looked practiced but charming. He sent a polite message first, then a thoughtful one, then a voice note with a deep, calm accent that made Kira's heart trip in her chest a little. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she seemed genuine. He told her he rarely met women with her energy. Kira didn't know what that meant, but it made her feel warm for the first time in a long time. She didn't respond right away. She stared at the message for a long time, her pulse racing in a way she hadn't felt in years. And then she replied. A simple hello? That was all it took. One message, one stranger, one moment of vulnerability. Kira had no idea that this small decision, the decision to answer a man she'd never met, would be the first step toward a future she could never have imagined. A future that would ruin everything she loved. What followed over the next 4 weeks was something Kira had never experienced before. It started with short messages, little compliments, questions about her day, sweet goodnights. But it quickly grew into something deeper. Rayan didn't text like the men Kira knew. He didn't send dry one-word replies or disappear for hours. He sent long messages, thoughtful messages, messages that made her feel like she mattered. Then came the voice notes, warm, deep, smooth, with a gentle accent that wrapped around her like silk. "Good morning, Kira," he'd say. "I hope today brings you joy." Or late at night, "I don't know why, but talking to you feels peaceful. Don't disappear on me." Kira played those messages over and over, sometimes with her phone pressed to her ear like she was trying to climb inside the sound of his voice. And then the calls started, hours-long conversations while she cooked dinner, whispered phone calls late at night while Marcus snored on the couch, quick chats in the morning before she took the kids to daycare. For 1 whole month, Rayan became her escape, her secret, her happiness. He told her about Dubai, the city of gold and glass, the place where the roads sparkled at night and the beaches looked like postcards. He described his life like a man who lived inside a luxury brochure, a private driver, expensive suits, 5-star hotels. He said his apartment overlooked the marina. He talked about shopping in Dubai Mall, eating at restaurants where reservations took months, and traveling to places Kira had only seen in movies. And she believed every word. Why wouldn't she? He sounded perfect. Too perfect. Whenever he asked about her life, Kira chose her words carefully. She didn't tell him about the apartment with the broken AC. She didn't tell him about Marcus falling asleep on the couch every night. She didn't tell him about Jalen's preschool tantrums or Mia's toothache or the sink full of dishes. She especially didn't tell him about the kids. Not yet. Instead, she told him she worked part-time, that she was sorting things out, that she lived alone. It was easier that way, easier to pretend, easier to feel like someone new. Rayan showered her with compliments, telling her she was elegant, refined, different from the women he met. Telling her she deserved soft things, beautiful things. Telling her he felt a connection with her he couldn't explain. For a woman who had spent years feeling invisible, those words felt like sunlight after a long winter. And then, one night in early October, he said something that made her heart stop. "I'll be in the U.S. next week," he told her. "A business program in Houston. Maybe we can meet?" Kira froze. For a whole month, this had been a fantasy, safe, distant, dreamlike. But now he was offering something real, something dangerous, something she knew she should say no to. But she didn't say no. She said yes. And just like that, the fantasy stepped off the screen and into her actual life. Kira had no idea how deeply she was slipping. She only knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she felt chosen, and she wasn't ready to let that feeling go. Before we continue, I just want to say, if you're still here listening to this story, thank you. This is a new channel, and honestly, every view, every like, every subscription means the world. It tells me these stories matter to you the way they matter to me. So if you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. All right, let's get back to it. When Kira pulled into the hotel parking lot in Houston, she felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. The building rose above her. Glass, gold lights, valet attendants opening doors for strangers who looked like they belonged there. She didn't, But when she saw Rayan waiting in the lobby, dressed in a fitted suit, smiling like he'd been searching for her in a crowd, she felt, for one moment, like she finally did. The weekend unfolded like a dream. Rayan took her to rooftop lounges with soft music and dim lighting that made the whole city seem to glow beneath them. They ate dinner in a restaurant so elegant Kira was afraid to touch anything. He held her chair out for her. He ordered for both of them with confidence. He told her stories about traveling through Europe, about business meetings in glass towers, about summers in the Maldives. And Kira listened, completely enthralled. She laughed in a way she hadn't laughed in years. She felt beautiful, seen, desired, like the version of herself she used to imagine becoming. In those moments, she didn't think about Cedar Heights. She didn't think about bills or laundry or daycare drop-offs. She didn't think about Marcus. She didn't think about the 2 small children waiting at home with their grandmother. For 2 days, Kira let herself forget her real life. And she loved how that felt. On the second night, after a long dinner and a slow walk through downtown Houston, they sat in Rayan's hotel suite with the city lights reflecting off the windows. The conversation drifted into deeper places. Future plans, hopes, what they wanted from life. Kira spoke softly, nervous but excited, letting herself imagine what it would be like if this wasn't temporary. If she really could step into a new world. And then it happened. A tiny slip. A simple sentence. One she didn't even realize she'd said until it was too late. She mentioned the kids. Just 2 words, barely noticeable, but everything changed. Rayan's smile disappeared for the first time since she'd met him. His posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed, like he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about her. "Kids?" he repeated. Kira froze. Her stomach dropped. She tried to explain, quickly, softly, awkwardly, but the tone of the room had shifted, and there was no bringing it back. Rayan leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. His voice, once warm and charming, turned cold at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" She felt small under his stare, embarrassed, ashamed. I didn't know how," she said. "I didn't want to scare you off." But he shook his head. "I don't date women with children," he said plainly. "It's complicated. My family would never accept that." He stood up, creating distance she couldn't close. "I'm sorry, Kira, but this can't go anywhere." That was it. No anger, no shouting, just finality. The kind that cuts deeper than cruelty. Kira left the hotel that night with her heart in pieces. The magic of the weekend collapsed into something sharp and painful. She drove back to Cedar Heights alone, crying behind the wheel as the highway lights streaked past her. When she walked into her apartment, Marcus was asleep on the couch. The kids' toys were scattered across the floor. The sink was full. The house smelled like leftover spaghetti. Her real life was waiting for her, unchanged. But Kira wasn't the same. She had gone from feeling chosen to feeling rejected. From feeling seen to feeling invisible again. From feeling like she had a chance at something better to realizing that her reality was a cage she didn't know how to escape. She didn't know it at the time, but that quiet drive home would mark the beginning of a new version of Kira, one shaped by heartbreak, envy, and desperation. A version who would soon start believing things she never would have believed before, and making choices she once would have sworn she could never make. After the Houston weekend, Kira returned to Cedar Heights with a heaviness she couldn't shake. The city felt smaller. Her apartment felt tighter. Even the sound of her children laughing or arguing felt distant, like she was listening from underwater. Rayan's final words replayed in her mind nonstop. "I don't date women with children. This can't go anywhere. My family would never accept that." She would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, hearing those sentences again and again. During the day, she checked her phone constantly, scrolling through old messages, re-listening to his voice notes, replaying the moments when he made her feel beautiful, wanted, chosen. She kept hoping he would change his mind, that he would text her out of nowhere, that he would say he'd made a mistake. But the messages never came. Rayan disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Kira with an emptiness she didn't know how to fill. And that emptiness turned into obsession. She Googled things she would have been embarrassed to say out loud. Can a single mom find a rich husband? Do wealthy men date women with kids? How to start over without baggage. The search results didn't comfort her. Most said the same thing. Men with high status prefer childless women. That sentence burned her. She clicked on forums, advice blogs, relationship videos, most repeating the same idea. Motherhood changes everything, not in a beautiful, sentimental way, in a limiting way, a way that made her feel like she had already lost before she even had a chance to play. Kira's mind spiraled. Divorce crossed her mind more than once. Maybe leaving Marcus would fix everything. Maybe she could start fresh. But every time she followed that thought to its end, she hit the same wall. She would still have the kids. She would still be a mother. No man, especially a man like Rayan, was going to sweep in and save her from the life she had built. And the resentment started to grow. Quietly, slowly. At first, she didn't recognize it for what it was. It came disguised as exhaustion, irritation, a constant sense of being overwhelmed, Jalen needing help with homework, Mia crying for a snack, Marcus asking if she'd paid the electric bill. Normal things, things she used to manage without thinking, now felt like chains wrapped around her ankles. Every responsibility reminded her of the life she had lost. Every mess reminded her of the life she wanted. Every cry, every tantrum, every grocery run, every bill became another reminder that she was trapped. Trapped in a life she didn't want. Trapped in a story she didn't choose. And Rayan represented the opposite. Freedom, luxury, desire. Escape. In her late-night thoughts, exhausted, heartbroken, unraveling, those two worlds began to collide. On one side, her children, her family, her reality. On the other, the fantasy she had tasted in Houston, a fantasy she convinced herself she deserved. And one night, while sitting alone at the kitchen table, long after the kids were asleep, she whispered a question she never imagined she could think, let alone say. What if they weren't here? The thought terrified her. She pushed it away instantly. But it came back, again and again, each time quieter, each time stronger, each time easier to justify. Kira didn't become a monster overnight. It was slow. It was subtle. It was 1,000 tiny moments of heartbreak, envy, exhaustion, and longing, building on top of each other until her mind twisted reality into something unrecognizable. She told herself she wanted a fresh start, a clean slate, a life where someone like Rayan could choose her without hesitation. But she couldn't see the truth. Not yet. The truth that the thing she felt trapped by was also the only innocent thing she had left. And soon, that desire for a different life, the fantasy that had started as harmless escape, would become something much darker, something she could never take back. Kira's dark thoughts didn't turn into a plan overnight. They started as flickers, brief, horrifying ideas she pushed away as soon as they appeared. But the more she felt trapped, the more those thoughts returned, each time staying a little longer, whispering a little louder. She began driving at night when she couldn't sleep. Sometimes she told Marcus she needed air. Other times she waited until he was snoring on the couch and slipped out quietly, leaving her phone at home so no one would call her back. She always ended up at the same place, Lake Cypress. A quiet stretch of water on the edge of town where the street lights faded and the surface reflected nothing but darkness. She would sit in her car and stare at the water for long stretches of time, letting the silence swallow her thoughts. At first, she convinced herself she was just thinking, just trying to clear her head. But as the nights went on, the lake became something else. It became the place where her darkest ideas didn't scare her anymore. It became the place where she let herself imagine a life without the responsibilities she felt chained to. A life where nothing held her back. A life she could start over. She began reading news stories on her phone late at night, old cases, missing children reports, situations she barely understood but clung to like they were answers. She wasn't looking for instructions. She was looking for reassurance. Reassurance that women had escaped their circumstances before. Reassurance that someone, somewhere, had walked away from motherhood and survived it. But everything she read led her deeper into denial. She told herself these were tragedies, accidents, things that just happened. She avoided the parts that made her uncomfortable. She avoided any story that looked too much like what she was imagining. She began driving different routes home, noticing where the streetlights dimmed, where traffic was slow, where the roads dipped into shadows. She wasn't planning, not in her mind, not officially. She told herself she was just observing, just thinking, just fantasizing about freedom. But in her heart, something was shifting, something irreversible. Kira started paying attention to the smallest details, how long it took to get from her apartment to the lake, how dark the roads were after 7 p.m., how quiet the shoreline became when the last fisherman went home. Those details settled into her mind like pieces of a puzzle she pretended she wasn't assembling. And as the days passed, she felt herself growing numb to guilt, numb to fear, numb to the little voices that used to stop her from thinking too far ahead. By mid-October, she wasn't driving to the lake just to think anymore. She was driving because the idea no longer scared her. It comforted her. It made her feel like she had control again. Like she had a way out. Like she could reclaim the life she believed she lost. Then came October 18th, 2023. It was an ordinary Wednesday. Marcus came home tired. The kids played on the living room floor. Dinner was simple, frozen pizza and leftover spaghetti. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But something inside Kira had already shifted into place. All the late-night drives, the spiraling thoughts, the quiet resentment, the fantasy she still couldn't let go of, they all converged into one decision. One she didn't say out loud, one she didn't write down, one she didn't even fully admit to herself until she heard her own voice asking the kids if they wanted ice cream. A simple question, a normal question, but this time, it meant something else. It meant she had chosen a path she could never return from. And when Kira strapped her children into the back seat that night, she wasn't thinking about ice cream. She wasn't thinking about bedtime. She wasn't thinking about tomorrow. She was thinking tonight. Tonight was the night she convinced herself she would finally be free. Tonight was the night she believed she could rewrite her life. Tonight was the night where darkness felt like salvation. She didn't see the truth. Not yet. She only saw the fantasy she was chasing. And the fantasy was leading her straight into tragedy. The roads were almost empty that night. A thin layer of fog drifted over the asphalt, softening the glow of the streetlights and turning everything outside Kira's windshield into a blur of orange and gray. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Behind her, the kids were half asleep, their little voices fading in and out as the tires hummed beneath them. "Mama, are we still getting ice cream?" one of them mumbled. Kira swallowed hard. Her voice came out too soft, too thin. "Yeah, baby, just a quick stop." She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She couldn't. The silence inside the car felt suffocating. Not the loud, chaotic kind she was used to, but a heavy, unnatural stillness. The kind that sits on your skin and makes it hard to breathe. As she approached Lake Cypress, her heart pounded so violently that for a moment she thought she might turn around. She slowed near the entrance, hesitated, but something colder, Something darker inside her whispered that she was too deep to back out. The gates to the boat ramp were open like always, unlocked, unguarded, forgotten. The lake stretched out before her, a black sheet beneath a moonless sky. Kira eased the car down the slope, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The kids stirred in the back seat, confused by the sudden change in motion. "Mama? Where are we?" She didn't answer. Her throat was too tight, her mind too loud. The waterline shimmered inches from the front bumper. She shifted the car into neutral and let her foot hover over the brake, shaking so hard her entire leg trembled. The last sound she heard from her children was a soft, sleepy sigh. The moment felt both frozen and unbearably fast. Then, with one shaky movement, one motion she would replay in her mind for the rest of her life, Kira lifted her foot. The car rolled forward. Slow at first, then faster. The tires hit the water with a splash that echoed through the quiet night. Kira stumbled backward out of the vehicle, slipping and falling onto the wet gravel. She watched as the front of the car dipped, then sank, then tilted. Red taillights glowed beneath the surface like two dying embers. Then they vanished. Gone. And for a few seconds the only sound was her own ragged breathing. The panic didn't hit her until the water swallowed the last bubble of air. When it did, it hit like a truck. Sudden, violent, overwhelming. Kira screamed, but the lake answered with silence. She staggered up the ramp, gasping, choking on her own sobs. Her mind raced with the lie she had been rehearsing for days, the story she had convinced herself she would be able to tell without breaking. A stranger, a carjacking, someone taking her babies. It felt easier in her head. It felt possible in theory. But now, in the cold darkness, the lie felt like a living thing clawing at her throat. Still, she forced herself to dial 911. Her hand shook so violently she dropped the phone once, twice, before she finally pressed the numbers. 911, what's your emergency? Kira sucked in a breath that sounded more like a cry for help than an answer. "My kids!" her voice cracked. "My kids! Someone took my kids!" She told the story through choked sobs, a man jumping into her car, forcing her out, speeding away with her babies. Her words tumbled out wild and frantic. She didn't have to fake the panic. The panic was real. But the truth wasn't. When the first officer arrived, she was on her knees by the ramp, rocking back and forth, repeating the same sentence over and over. "He took them. He took them. He took them." Her voice echoed across the lake, carried by the wind into the darkness. Within an hour, emergency crews swarmed the area, sirens flashing red and blue across the water. Helicopters circled, officers searched the shoreline. Reporters began gathering as the rumor spread. 2 missing children. Possible abduction. By dawn, Kira was on the morning news, wrapped in a blanket, face streaked with tears. Her voice trembled as she begged the public to help find her babies. The country responded. Amber alerts pinged across Texas phones. The story hit national headlines within hours. A mother, 2 children, a mysterious abduction. America rallied behind her, flooding social media with prayers and hashtags. Kira was hailed as the shattered, grieving mom living every parent's worst nightmare. Cameras captured her trembling hands. Reporters whispered about her bravery. Strangers cried watching her interviews. No one knew that beneath the tears, beneath the shaking voice, beneath the desperate pleas. Kira still heard the faint echo of taillights disappearing into black water. The world saw a mother begging for her children, but the lake had seen something else entirely. At first, Kira looked like every detective's worst kind of case, a terrified mother with 2 missing kids and a story full of chaos. But seasoned investigators know something the public doesn't. Real victims rarely look polished. Real panic is messy. Real terror is disorganized. And from the very first hour, Something about Kira Cross just didn't add up. Detective Luis Ramirez noticed it before anyone else. While officers searched the shoreline and divers prepared to enter the lake, Ramirez stayed back and watched Kira. Really watched her. A mother whose children had just been abducted usually couldn't be held back. She'd be screaming, begging, trying to run toward the water, toward the road, toward anything that felt like hope. Kira didn't. She stayed seated on the ambulance step, wrapped in a blanket she didn't need, eyes darting around as though checking who was watching her, rather than what was happening to her babies. Reporters were the first to circle her, microphones out, faces sympathetic. And Kira played her part flawlessly, broken voice, trembling hands, tear-streaked cheeks. She cried for the cameras, clutched her chest for dramatic effect, whispered, "Please, please bring my babies home." But the moment the cameras lowered, Ramirez saw it. The shift. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadied, her eyes went cold and flat. As if someone had flipped off the emotional switch inside her. Then, the moment another crew approached, she snapped back into character. It wasn't the performance that bothered Ramirez, it was the breaks in the performance. Back at the scene, officers began examining the road leading to the boat ramp. There should have been skid marks, footprints, signs of struggle. Anything to support Kira's story about a violent carjacker forcing her out of the vehicle. There was nothing, not a scuff, not a drag mark, not a single tire pattern consistent with a sudden stop. Under the pale glow of searchlights, the gravel looked undisturbed, quiet, untouched. Meanwhile, Kira's timeline kept shifting. First, she claimed the man had jumped into the passenger side. Then she said it was the driver's side. She said he was yelling, then said he'd been silent. Even the direction he supposedly fled changed 3 times in 2 interviews. But the clearest red flag came at 5:14 a.m. when Detective Ramirez asked her a simple question. "Kira, which direction did the car go after the man pushed you out?" She hesitated, too long for someone watching their life fall apart, then pointed vaguely toward the main road. Ramirez nodded, but his eyes narrowed. By sunrise, the lake search had officially begun. Police boats cut through the still, dark water. Divers suited up, tightening their vests, clipping on flashlights. The news crews stayed camped near the ramp, broadcasting live updates. The entire state was watching. Kira watched too, but not like a mother desperate for answers. She watched like someone terrified of being found out. At 7:42 a.m., the captain on the lead search boat radioed in a possible sighting. A dark shape beneath the waterline, about 30 yards from the ramp. Divers went under. 10 minutes passed. 20. Then, slowly, a vehicle began to rise to the surface, dragged by a steel cable. The water poured out through shattered windows. Mud and algae clung to the metal. It was a gray Toyota Camry, Kira's car. And then came the moment that froze every officer on shore. 2 small silhouettes sat inside, one in the back seat, one in the booster chair. Unmoving, weightless, gone. The news crews fell silent. Officers lowered their heads. Even the divers, men hardened by years of grim recovery missions, paused when they saw the tiny faces pressed against the glass. But the person who reacted the most strangely was Kira. When detectives approached her, her first words were not, "Are they alive?" or "Did you find my babies?" Kira's first words were, "Did anyone see what happened?" Ramirez stared at her, feeling the final puzzle piece click into place. The perfect victim was starting to crack, and behind the cracks, something horrifying was beginning to show. Kira Cross sat in the small gray interrogation room with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, rocking gently like the walls were closing in. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting a hard white glow on her face. No makeup, no tears, just exhaustion and something deeper. Something hollow. Detective Ramirez entered the room with a folder so thick it bent in his hands. He didn't sit right away. He didn't speak. He just placed the folder on the table between them and let the silence stretch until Kira finally cracked. "Can I go home now?" she whispered. Ramirez's expression didn't change. "Kira, we found the car." She blinked as if the words weren't hitting her fast enough. I told you someone took it. I told you." He opened the folder. Photos slid across the metal table. Underwater shots, the Camry sinking, the two small faces blurred by water and mud. Kira inhaled sharply, but it wasn't grief that flickered across her expression. It was fear. "We found them buckled inside," Ramirez said softly. "Both of them. No signs of a struggle. No signs anyone else forced them in." He leaned forward. "Only you." Kira's jaw tightened, her leg bouncing faster beneath the table. "You're wrong. Someone stole the car. I told you." Ramirez didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he reached into the folder again and laid down a new set of photos. Screenshots this time. Messages, call logs, voicemails. A man's voice saved to an audio file. Kira froze. When detectives finally gained access to Kira's phone, they expected to find traces of a wealthy foreign businessman, flight receipts, hotel confirmations, business contacts, maybe even international transfers. But the deeper they dug, the stranger things became. There were no travel logs, no Emirati banking information, no employment records, no traceable connections to any Sheikh Rayyan bin Khalid. Even the number he used wasn't tied to any carrier in the UAE. It was a VoIP line bouncing through multiple servers, routed through cheap VPN extensions and disposable accounts. Nothing about this sheikh existed outside the messages he sent her. Detectives pulled in cybercrimes specialists to crack the layers of masking, and after hours of routing paths, IP traces, cloud backup retrievals, and digital fingerprints, the illusion finally shattered. The trail led not to the glittering skyline of Dubai Marina, but to an old, overcrowded building in Dera, a neighborhood far from luxury. A place of small apartments, cheap restaurants, and teachers who shared rooms to afford rent. There, behind a metal door streaked with rust, lived the man Kira believed was the key to her happily ever after. His name wasn't Rayyan. His name was Adil Rahman, 33 years old, a part-time English teacher earning the equivalent of $1,800 a month. No private jets, no driver, no servants, no palace. Just a cracked Android phone, a chipped coffee table, and a collection of fake social media profiles he rotated through whenever he wanted attention or money. Detectives contacted the Dubai police, who conducted a quiet check on Adil. They found everything the investigation needed: multiple dating profiles, dozens of women in different countries, saved conversations he clearly recycled word for word. He had "Good morning, Habibti" messages copied and pasted to 7 women at the exact same time. He had sent pictures of his yacht to 4 different women, photos proven to be Google Images downloads. His private driver was an Uber receipt. His penthouse view was a stolen Instagram photo. He lived a life of complete digital fiction, and Kira had fallen deeper into the fantasy than any woman he had ever spoken to before. Detectives reached out to several of his victims. One woman in London admitted she had sent him nearly $900 after he claimed he needed to fix his passport. Another in Nairobi said she wasted a year believing he was going to marry her. A woman from Toronto said he convinced her to buy him a new phone. A woman in Houston had been messaging him at the same time he was messaging Kira. She thought she was his only love, too. All of them had the same reaction when they were shown his real photo: shock, embarrassment, betrayal. But Kira was the only one whose obsession turned deadly. The only one who murdered her children in the name of a romance that never existed. The detectives returned with printed photos of Adil, standing in a classroom, leaning over a desk, eating lunch in a plastic chair, wearing the same cheap button-down shirt in every picture. Nothing about him resembled the rich, confident, smooth-talking fantasy he sold. When they placed the photos in front of Kira during a jailhouse interview, she stared at them as though they were part of some cruel trick. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't him. This can't be him. That's not Ryan." But reality doesn't bend just because someone wishes it would. The investigator slid another paper forward, screenshots of his conversations with 5 other women, all identical to the ones he sent Kira. Promises of a mansion, promises of a marriage, promises of a new life. Copy, paste, copy, paste. Kira's voice cracked. "He said I was special." "He said that to everyone," the detective replied calmly. "You weren't the only one. You weren't even the newest one." The truth sank into her like a weight tied to her lungs. The man she thought she was sacrificing everything for wasn't royalty. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't even emotionally invested. He was just another lonely man behind a screen, pretending to be someone he wasn't. A man who had been recycling romantic lies for nearly 4 years. A man who had never planned to come to Texas. The Houston weekend was nothing but a work trip he repurposed into a seduction. He had met her for 2 days, charmed her, slept with her, and then moved on. Kira didn't cry, not at first. She just sat there, frozen in a silence that felt too heavy for the room. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was the devastating realization that everything she destroyed, everything she sacrificed, everything she killed for, was nothing. A fantasy. Pixels on a screen. A dream sold to her by a man who never once thought about her marriage, or her children. He had played with her mind, tapped into her insecurities, inflated her hopes, and then tossed her aside the moment she didn't fit the image he wanted. Hours later, inside her cell, the breakdown finally came. She crumpled onto the floor, fists pressed to her head, whispering the same sentence over and over. "I did it for nothing. I did it for nothing. I did it for nothing." And the tragedy was that she was right. Her children were dead. Her husband's world was ruined. Her life was over. And the man who sparked it all didn't even remember the dates they met. The courtroom was overflowing on the first day of Kira Cross's trial. News stations lined the sidewalks. True crime bloggers brought notebooks. Parents from the children's school arrived early, filling the benches behind the prosecution. The entire county seemed to be watching. Kira entered in a pale orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, head lowered. She had lost 20 pounds since the night of the drowning. Her eyes were sunken, her skin dull, her expression almost empty. Whatever spark she once had, the excitement she felt messaging Ryan late at night, the glow she had when she packed her bags for Houston, had evaporated. But the person who mattered most was sitting in the front row, Marcus. He didn't look at her. Not once. Not even when she entered. His face was rigid, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. His hands were tightly intertwined, as though he were holding himself together by force. Behind him sat his family, Kira's former in-laws, faces swollen from months of grieving. Photos of Jalen and Mia were placed on the bench beside them, their smiles bright and haunting. The prosecution opened with a brutal timeline: the late-night drive, the rehearsed kidnapping story, the fake tears for the cameras, the inconsistencies, the search results on her phone, the fantasy relationship with a man who never existed. Then came the recordings, the interrogation footage where detectives confronted her with the truth, the audio of Kira whispering, "I did it for him." The 911 call, the security footage from the gas station. Each piece hammered another nail into her coffin. The medical examiner testified about the children's final moments. The courtroom had heard tragic things before, but this was different. Hearing the details of how the children drowned, how long it took, how they were strapped in, how the car sank, left the entire room silent. A juror wept openly. Another covered her face. Marcus pressed his forehead into his hands, shoulders trembling. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity, manipulation, depression, and a mental breakdown brought on by emotional coercion. They painted Adil as a predator. They argued that Kira was vulnerable, her identity collapsing under the weight of unmet expectations and loneliness. But no argument could erase the reality that 2 children had died in terror because of her actions. No explanation could convince the jury that fantasies justified murder. The prosecution emphasized premeditation, the late-night research, the route testing, the trip to the lake days before the crime, the calmness during the press interviews. This was not a moment of madness, the prosecutor said. This was a choice she planned, executed, and lied about. The pivotal moment of the trial came when Marcus was asked to testify. He walked slowly to the stand, carrying one of Jalen's drawings, a crayon picture of their family holding hands. His voice cracked several times, but his words were clear. He described their children, Jalen's fascination with dinosaurs, and Mia's love for glittery shoes. Their laughter, their routines, the bedtime stories, the school pickups, the little fights over toys. He spoke about the night police told him the car had been found. The moment he collapsed, the moment he realized the woman he loved had destroyed everything they built. He cried, but he didn't yell. He didn't curse Kira. His grief was too deep for anger. By the time closing arguments were made, the verdict felt inevitable. After less than 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreperson's voice was steady. "We find the defendant, Kira Cross, guilty of capital murder." A soft gasp came from the audience. One of Marcus's relatives began to sob. Kira didn't react. She stared forward, eyes unfocused, as though listening from underwater. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Adil faced almost no consequences. UAE authorities questioned him briefly, confiscated his laptop, and fined him for operating online accounts under false identities. But because none of the women directly sent him money, and because he wasn't legally tied to Kira's crime, he walked away. He deleted his accounts, changed his SIM card, and within weeks, he was back online. New profiles, new names, new victims. A man who had indirectly caused the deaths of 2 children faced nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Back in Texas, the aftermath was devastating. Marcus attended counseling weekly. He rarely spoke publicly about Kira. He focused on honoring his children's memory. Fundraisers, school scholarships, a memorial garden. Neighbors placed toys and flowers at the boat ramp for months. Parents from across the state wrote letters expressing their heartbreak. And the small community of Cedar Heights learned a lesson they would never forget. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they grow quietly in the spaces where loneliness meets fantasy. Some cases leave behind anger. Some leave behind confusion. But this one leaves behind something heavier. A reflection on how easily desperation can turn into delusion. How vulnerability can be weaponized, and how fantasies, when left unchecked, can kill. Kira was not born a murderer. She was shaped into one by a lifetime of insecurity, emotional neglect, and an internal void she tried desperately to fill. The online romance didn't create her darkness. It amplified it, it fed it, it sharpened it. Romance scammers like Adil thrive on the lonely, the hopeful, the overlooked. They know exactly what to say, what to promise, what weaknesses to tap into. They target the people who feel invisible, and they make them feel chosen. But the danger doesn't lie in the scammer's words alone. The real danger lies in the moment a fantasy becomes stronger than a person's reality. When the need to be loved overpowers logic. When the promise of escape blinds someone to the consequences. Before we close, we must honor the true victims, Jalen and Mia, 2 young children who never asked for any of this. 2 bright souls whose futures were stolen not by a stranger, but by their own mother. Their loss is the heartbeat of this case. Their absence is the real tragedy, not the scandal, not the scam, not the trial. This story is for them, a reminder of how fragile life is, how dangerous unchecked fantasies can become, and how important it is to seek help before desperation turns deadly. If you found this story powerful or thought-provoking, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from. Your city, your country, your corner of the world. We read them all. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next case we uncover. Thank you for watching.